What you're seeing now is really the construction of art. The materials, the cranes, all the technical processes that are going on are processes that are perhaps more familiar to the construction of a building, but in fact a major sculpture, a work by Marc de Souvreau, is being put up in front of the new museum on the parkland directly across from it. Artists today are more and more involved with technological processes. They're using materials of industry, plastic, steel. They're using industrial techniques to create large-scale works, many of which can't even be housed in museum spaces. We felt that in the new museum, the most important thing we could do was to provide large warehouse spaces, spanned areas, free of columns, which could be used for huge architectural shows, large sculptures, extensive exhibitions that required unbroken spaces. And in planning the new building, we had a warehouse mentality. We talked with a lot of artists and said, you know, what do you really want? Well, their interest certainly is not in elegant finish, gilded ceilings and chandeliers and so forth. Their interest is in raw space. And the important thing was to arrive at a kind of space which would satisfy the artists. Space which was not only exhibition space, which could also be working space, because a great many of the pieces in the new exhibition, Works for New Spaces, were made directly on the spot. The critical thing about the opening exhibition is that it is an attempt to make use of the spaces within the museum, the galleries, the concourse, the terraces, and the land immediately adjacent to it. We invited virtually every one of these artists to come to Minneapolis during the construction period of the new building to examine the spaces and with the staff to make some decision as to the area that he or she would want to work in. And many of them regarded this as a challenge, and their works, in effect, challenged the building. Primarily, the attempt was to make use of the building's possibilities. We didn't really tell the artists what to do, but we knew a great deal about what each of these artists would do, and gave them a chance to operate within the space. The Art Center has moved towards a very active involvement with modern art, and in recent years has become, to a certain extent, an enabler, assisting artists to make works within the museum and in the areas around the city. So this exhibition has certain definite characteristics. For instance, there's a quality of impermanence about a great many of the works in it. There are materials such as string, sand, glass embedded in sand rather casually, stretched fabric, gauze. It seems to me that the exhibition is as much a series of temporary events, as it is large-scale, enduring objects. It sort of suggests that artists are, in some instances, aren't so much interested in permanence as they are in the experience of making things. We think it's very important that when people come to the museum, they have some sense of the ideas and processes, the labor that went into the creation of a work of art. And more, we're trying to document these processes. It gives you a whole sense of the artist's involvement with technological processes, with construction techniques and so forth. And it also gives you some idea of the way he thinks. In other words, he's using industrial processes in order to create an aesthetic work, an experience. And to see Lynda Benglis perched on a ladder and wearing what looks like a dog muzzle, pouring buckets of some unmentionable viscous liquid, polyurethane, big black gunk, down a structure of wood and plastic gives you some idea of the whole process. Not only that, but when you look at the Benglis piece, you see really congealed waves or globs of this plastic material, which in a sense is frozen, you know, in space. The work itself becomes a record of the process of pouring. And it's interesting to see a documentation of how she went about it. And it's interesting to me, and I think to most people who see this, see how the piece retains the evidence of its making. But the Art Center is as involved with ideas as it is with forms. And its interests include design, architecture, city planning, modern music and dance, poetry, a strong emphasis upon education in the arts for a very large public, as well as specialized education, dealing with individual works or particular exhibitions. But these days, the arts are definitely involved, hopelessly involved with one another. It's very difficult, let's say, in some instances, to separate an artistic event from, let's say, a theatrical event or a literary event or a dance event. Well, the Art Center began as the collection of one man, Thomas Barlow Walker. He worked as a lumber dealer in Illinois, and he moved to Minneapolis, and he invested in timberland. And in 1874 began collecting paintings and prints for his house at 8th and Hennepin. The things that he collected were, for the most part, historical European works, 19th century paintings, 17th, 18th century Dutch portraits. And gradually he expanded his interests and became involved in decorative arts, and ultimately began focusing on Oriental art, late Chinese jade, Persian pottery. And the collection was a kind of an encyclopedia of art history. It became necessary for him to add, let's say, a wing onto his house, and ultimately to build his own gallery. And then in 1927, he built on the site of the present Walker Art Center a museum, the Walker Art Gallery. He was interested in a large-scale public involvement in arts, education, science. Well, the building that Mr. Walker had originally constructed was a rather florid affair from the exterior. It was built in a Spano-Moresque style. The facade, however, began to experience some difficulty. The site of the Walker Art Center is partially on an old marsh, and a settling process had begun, and this began to loosen some of the structure, and a chunk of terracotta narrowly missed one of our customers, and this was beginning to be somewhat lethal, and the decision was that the building should be refaced. So in the mid-40s, all that pastry gun architecture was peeled off, and a modern, somewhat streamlined facade was substituted and remained on the building until its demolition in 1969. Now, this fragility problem wasn't necessarily resolved by simply changing the facade. We found that the building was beginning to list. It had gone 14 inches down on the north side, and structural problems were beginning to appear. There were days when the elevator couldn't function, and literally you could roll a marble, you know, slowly, but it would move across the floor. And we found that it was largely being held together with spackle. So that was one of the reasons that we decided to get into this business of rebuilding. The proposal then was based on a need for space for our increased audiences for performing arts events, our need for more gallery space for our large exhibitions, our permanent collection, and also because the museum was just doing more. The remodeling project then turned into a total building project, and somebody did a little mathematics and found out that it was possible really to do a new building for less money than to add on to the old one. When the old Art Center building was torn down in 1969, our community program accelerated. We felt that it was very important to continue our service to a rather large audience. We didn't want to lose 2.5 years of that audience. So we began doing exhibitions in department stores. As you know, we did several large shows in Dayton's 8th floor auditorium space. We organized film programs in the public library. We held design classes and other classes in office buildings. Our public school activities, our programs in the public school consisted of classes held in the basements of such schools as Brown Junior High. The basements, because the art rooms themselves were really much too small. We began holding classes in motorcycle shops and television studios and so forth. We found ourselves developing a new audience. And that audience we want to keep. We want to maintain that relationship and get them to come to the museum. At the same time, we want to continue this program of reaching into the community, and we're very, very interested in the feedback possibilities. I feel that the programmatic aspects of the museum will naturally be based here in the building, but should not be confined to the building, and that the building should be a source of energy from which ideas and programs radiate. This kind of activity helps to make the arts a central ingredient in the lives of people. This is a characteristic which has been absent for a long time in our society. The arts have been so peripherally treated as if they could only occur within the confines, let's say, of a concert hall or a theater or a museum. And while it's true that these buildings offer relatively ideal conditions, they don't offer the only conditions. In addition to its visual arts program, the Art Center has long been involved in presenting new manifestations in music, dance, film, and poetry. We believe that an interest in one particular art form can also be the basis for developing an interest in another. And since we are exploring a wide range and are seeking quality in each of these areas, the Art Center visitor has an excellent opportunity to be exposed to a number of manifestations that represent artistic activity today. The museum has sponsored dance programs and has even sponsored workshops on dance. For example, Merce Cunningham, Paul Taylor, some of the Martha Graham dancers, Alvin Nicolai, came here under our auspices, conducted workshops, lecture demonstrations, and gave performances in the Guthrie Theater, the Grand Union, a very informal kind of dance group. They'd be characterized by its apparent lack of structure and formality. Ads were placed in the paper for non-dancers, and a variety of individuals who'd never had any kind of stage or performance experience of any sort turned up to participate in what was a kind of communal creative event. Film, we've done quite a bit with film and are now opening a program of screenings by young filmmakers. We'll
set up a time, probably once a month, during which young filmmakers can come and show anything they've made and talk to each other about their work. The public can or cannot attend as it chooses, but these will be relatively unstructured programs, and from these we'll try to get some idea of the talent and personalities working here on film, and give, maybe more important, give filmmakers a chance to know each other. In music, we've sponsored a diversity of programs, some very conventional, small chamber groups, soloists, and other programs which are, I think, quite unique. For example, before the museum even opened, we ran a series of evenings of experimental music, which involved electronic equipment, all sorts of feedback processes, movement, ideas which are perhaps more related to happenings than to formal musical structure. We sponsored a series of poetry readings during the time the museum was being built, and something like 450 people attended readings by young poets from this region. But can you imagine a standing room for poets? But we actually had that situation, standing room for poets. And we'd like to do more with it. The permanent collection of the museum is relatively strong in the art of the 60s. Key examples of works by Louise Nevelson, the huge Sky Cathedral presence, which again is a rather mysterious, surrealistic thing that suggests the wall of some ancient, forgotten civilization. On a much smaller scale, a much more intimate scale, are the boxes of Joseph Cornell, which have all sorts of metaphysical references to mythology. Direct expressionism of the 1950s, the Gottlieb trio, three astral forms, lozenges floating in space over an area that could be land, that could be sea, a very metaphysical kind of expressionism. For the most part, the collection has isolated examples of key movements, directions of the 20th century. Such European classics as the Franz Marc Blue Horses, the Duchamp Villon, serve as guideposts to the development of early 20th century art. Such well-known works as the Joseph Stella American Landscape, The View of the Brooklyn Bridge, and the Edward Hopper Office at Night document the evolution of American modernism. There are key American sculptors such as David Smith, whose enormous cubite, stainless steel, represents a latter-day return to Cubism. Tony Smith's large Amaryllis, which dominates one of the terraces, Lipchitz's Prometheus Strangling the Vulture, a key work in American expressionistic sculpture. The minimalists, Judd and Flavin, are represented with important examples. The colorist painters, Morris Lewis and Kenneth Nolan, are represented by several works in the collection. And there's a rather strong pop section that includes a large billboard-sized painting by former Minneapolis artist Jimmy Rosenquist and the Falling French Fried Potatoes by the Dean of Pop, Klaus Oldenburg. The Art Center is connected to the Guthrie Theater by a wide concourse. A huge skylight dominates this high interior space, which is on occasion used for displaying works of art. In the lobby is a bookstore and quite a range of recent publications on painting, sculpture, architecture, design, city planning are available. We're related to the theater, to the Guthrie activities. Connected to the lobby is a 350-seat auditorium, very steeply raked, which is used for films, lectures, and small musical events. Also off the concourse is a small lecture information room. This is an environment of carpeted bleacher seats which face a wide curved screen. And this room, rather a unique one in a museum, is used as an orientation point for tours as well as for visual presentations, slides and films related to current exhibitions. Also off the lobby is a small gallery which contains some of the original T.B. Walker collection of Oriental art. The famous 18th century jade mountain, a monumental carving, is shown there, as well as a number of examples of Chinese, Japanese, and Korean sculpture and porcelains. The new galleries are virtually warehouse spaces, and these can accommodate everything from a traditional painting exhibition to large-scale environmental events and sculptures, such as the gigantic ones in the opening exhibition, Works for New Spaces. As that particular show illustrated, the galleries can also serve as working spaces for artists. And in designing the building, the architect, Edward Larrabee Barnes, was completely aware of the need for such large, flexible work and exhibition spaces. He wanted the visitors to move easily through these, to experience a sense of continuity, and at the same time to be in spaces which were assertive, but not in any way conflicting with the works that they were displaying. The spaces vary progressively in their height and general proportion. In general, the plan is a closed one. That is, there are a few external openings. A few of the galleries admit outside light, but for the most part, the sheer and continuous exterior walls, somewhat formidable perhaps from the outside, provide some dramatic interior vistas. It's possible to see, for example, 150 feet in one direction. The galleries are easily joined together to accommodate a large show without breaking the sequence of the exhibition. While the minimalistic design for the new building is certainly assertive, Barnes understood that the real function of a museum is to exhibit and not overwhelm works of art. There are 7 large galleries. These are basically rectangular volumes that radiate from a central core which contains the passenger elevator and stairs. And the spiral plan is extremely logical. The visitor progresses by half levels through a series of galleries, a kind of flattened spiral shape. And the last gallery, Gallery 7, takes him directly out onto the first of 3 roof terraces which continue this sequence. And on the roof terraces, large sculptures are displayed against the city skyline. The narrowest of these terraces, Terrace 3, also serves as an extension of the restaurant, and tables and chairs are out there in good weather where visitors to the museum are able to look at sculpture, enjoy the city, and at the same time dine informally.
The Art Center is responsible to a very diversified kind of audience. We have people who are very knowledgeable, who are expert in various manifestations that occur here. We have people who know a great deal about painting who come as our audience, and people who know a lot about architecture and design. People who come to our film events, many of them have great and specialized knowledge. But at the same time, we have to deal with the idea of pluralism in the audience, as well as with the idea of pluralism in art. And we have to begin with a neophyte as well. We have to try to give everybody the opportunity to be a creative participant and recognize that people's interests and experiences are varied, and try to make the programs that we do, try to make the exhibitions that we have interest them.
The Art Center has changed dramatically from its beginnings as a repository of T.B. Walker's collection. The Walker family and the T.B. Walker Foundation and the board of directors of the museum have been primarily interested in maintaining it as a lively force, as a museum that would be representative of its time. This view obviously provides for evolution, and there has been evolution in the museum, and it has responded to social and artistic issues. The new building, by its flexibility and scale, should allow for the continuation of that evolutionary process. The most important purpose of the museum is to make the new forms and ideas of art accessible to a growing and responsive audience.